The sting came before the sound did. My hand flew to my cheek, fingers pressing against skin that hadn't even had time to turn red yet, and the whole reception hall went quiet the way a room only goes quiet when everyone's pretending they didn't just see something they can never unsee. My veil had slipped sideways. Somewhere behind me, a champagne glass hit the floor and didn't break, just rolled in a slow half circle, like it was looking for somewhere to hide too. My mother's hand was still raised. "No daughter of mine wears that," she said, loud enough for the DJ to hear, loud enough for my new husband's grandmother to hear, loud enough for the caterer to freeze mid-pour. "You know exactly what you did." I didn't. Not yet. But I would. And 3 weeks later, she'd be the one explaining herself, under oath. "My name is Maren Castile. I was 34 years old on my wedding day, and I'd spent the 12 years before it building something most people said couldn't be done. A boutique event design firm, started with $4,200 of my own savings and a folding table at a farmer's market, grown into a company that grossed $2.3 million a year and employed 11 people. I designed weddings for other people. I'd never once imagined my own would end with my mother's palm print on my face. My fiancé Theo was a structural engineer, steady and quiet in the way that made loud things feel survivable. We'd been together 4 years. The wedding cost $86,000, most of it mine, some of it a joint gift from Theo's parents, and exactly $0 from my mother, Denise, who had nonetheless spent the better part of a year telling anyone who'd listen how much she was sacrificing for it. What I didn't know yet, standing there with my cheek burning and 200 guests watching, was that my mother wasn't slapping me over a dress. She was slapping me to keep a room full of witnesses from asking the wrong questions. The dress in question was ivory silk, high-necked, sleeves to the wrist. My grandmother's dress, altered by hand, worn once before at a wedding in 1968. I'd chosen it on purpose. It wasn't revealing. It wasn't even remotely controversial. My mother's hand had already been raised for something else entirely, I'd realized later. She just needed a reason the room would accept. In the moment, all I had was her voice, pitched for an audience, and her eyes, not angry exactly. Calculating. The way you look at someone when you need them destabilized before they can ask a real question. Theo's hand found my elbow. "We don't have to stay," he murmured. I stayed. I always stay long enough to understand what I'm looking at. That night, changed out of the dress, sitting on the edge of a hotel bathtub, I finally asked myself the question I should have asked months earlier. Why had my mother spent 11 months acting like my wedding was a hostile takeover of something that belonged to her? 2 days after the wedding, I drove to my mother's house to return a serving tray. She wasn't home. Her neighbor, Pam, was watering the hedge between their driveways and said, without any prompting at all, "Denise finally get that loan sorted out?" She was so stressed about the paperwork deadline. I said nothing. I smiled, thanked her, and drove straight to my car before I let my face do anything else. Loan. Paperwork deadline. My mother didn't have any loans that I knew of. She'd retired 4 years ago on my late father's pension and a modest 401k. I called my father's old accountant, a family friend named Walt who'd done our taxes since I was 12. I asked casually if he still helped my mother with anything financial. "Not since last spring," he said. "She switched to someone new. Younger fella. I think your mother mentioned he was helping her restructure some things ahead of your wedding." He paused. "Actually, Maren, she asked me a strange question back in March. Wanted to know if a parent could be listed as a joint applicant on a business loan using their adult child's company as collateral, without the child's signature, if there was power of attorney involved." The floor didn't drop out from under me. It just got very, very cold. I pulled my own corporate filings. As the sole owner of Castile Events LLC, I had access to everything. UCC filings, liens, anything registered against the business. It took 40 minutes to find it. A U1 financing statement filed 9 months earlier, listing my company's equipment and accounts receivable as collateral against a $180,000 loan. Debtor listed. Castile Events LLC. Secured party. Meridian Trust Lending. Signature on file. Maren Castile. I had never seen this document in my life. I called my mother. I kept my voice level the way I always do when something matters too much to let it shake. Mom, there's a lien on my company. My signature's on it. I didn't sign anything. She didn't miss a beat. Oh honey, that's just a bookkeeping formality. My financial advisor, Curtis, said that with the power of attorney from when your father was sick, some of the paperwork carries over as a legacy authorization. It's completely standard for family businesses. It protects the estate continuity. It's not even active debt yet. It's just a placeholder facility in case I need to help you with vendor financing down the line. Curtis explained the whole thing. You should really thank me, Marin. I was trying to set you up for success. Legacy authorization. Placeholder facility. Vendor financing down the line. It was jargon soup, and every word of it was designed to make me feel stupid for questioning her. I said, oh okay. That makes sense. Thank you, Mom. I did not believe one syllable of it. 2 weeks later, I stopped by my mother's house to drop off a gift from a wedding guest. Her front door was ajar. Before I knocked, I heard her on the phone in the kitchen laughing. She bought it completely, my mother said. Curtis, I'm telling you, she apologized to me. My daughter apologized to me for asking a normal question. She's exactly like her father. Give her a big enough word and she folds. A pause, then delighted. The wedding slap worked out better than I even planned. Nobody in that room is going to believe a word she says about me now. Hysterical bride slapped by her mother. People eat that up, they side with the mother every time. I stood on the porch for a long moment, gift bag in hand, and felt something in my chest go very still and very clear. She hadn't slapped me over a dress. She'd slapped me to inoculate herself, to make sure that when I eventually found the loan, I'd look unstable instead of right. I decided, standing on that porch, that my mother had made one critical error. She thought the slap had worked, so I let her keep thinking it. For the next 5 weeks, I became someone slightly smaller. I called her more, not less soft, uncertain calls where I asked her advice on vendor invoices I didn't need help with. I let my voice waver on purpose during one conversation, said, I just don't know what's real anymore, Mom. I feel like I can't trust my own judgment since the wedding. I wore my hair down instead of the sleek ponytail I do for meetings. I let her see me twice, dabbing at my eyes at a family dinner over nothing in particular. Internally, I was doing something else entirely. Every soft phone call was recorded, legally, in a one-party consent state, on a second phone I kept in my blazer pocket. Every confused question I asked her about the loan was designed to get her to repeat and elaborate the lie on tape, in her own words with dates. I told Theo the plan over dinner. She thinks I'm folding. I need her to keep talking. People who think they've already won stop being careful. He studied me for a second. You're terrifying, he said. Marry me again. The bait was simple. I told my mother in a confused, teary voicemail that Castile Events had a $220,000 vendor contract closing at the end of the month, and that I was thinking of using that loan facility Curtis set up to cover a cash flow gap in the meantime, since I trusted her judgment more than my own right now. It was a lie. There was no cash flow gap. But I knew it would force her hand. If the loan was real and legitimate, she'd have paperwork ready. If it wasn't, she'd have to invent something on the spot with Curtis, and I'd finally see them coordinate the cover-up in real time. I set a small recorder in the flower arrangement on my mother's dining table 3 days later, the night she invited me and Curtis over, to go over the numbers together. So you feel better, sweetheart? My phone sat face down on the table beside it, buzzing once quietly every time my attorney, retained that week, a sharp woman named Priya Okonkwo who specialized in fraud and elder law overlap cases, texted me confirmation that she was monitoring the live audio feed from a car parked down the block. Buzz. I hear them. Keep going. Buzz. He just said the collateral figure out loud. Got it. Buzz. Don't react. Let him finish. The final act happened, fittingly, at another family gathering, my mother's 60th birthday dinner. 40 guests at a private room in the same hotel where my wedding reception had been held. She'd chosen the venue on purpose, I think, some perverse victory lap. Halfway through dinner, with Curtis seated at her right hand in a suit too expensive for a financial advisor, who mostly handled retirement accounts, My mother raised her glass and said to the whole table, "I just want to say how proud I am of Marin for finally growing up and trusting her mother's guidance again. It hasn't always been easy raising a daughter who thinks she knows better than everyone." A ripple of polite laughter. Curtis smiled into his wine. I stood up. I did not raise my voice. I never do. "I want to say something too," I said, and the room quieted the way it had at my wedding, except this time I was the one holding the room, not shrinking in it. 9 months ago, my mother filed a lien against my company for $180,000, using my forged signature, under a power of attorney that expired the day my father died 4 years ago. Curtis Vance helped her draft it. I have the UCC filing. I have the forged signature compared against 3 notarized documents with my real one. And I have a recording from 3 nights ago of both of you discussing how to backdate a promissory note to cover the fraud before my accountant's annual audit next month. Curtis's wine glass stopped halfway to his mouth. My mother laughed, one sharp, disbelieving syllable. "You're being hysterical again, just like the wedding." "The slap," I said, still calm, still quiet, "was so that if this moment ever came, everyone at this table would remember me as the unstable one. It was a good plan. It just needed me to never find the paperwork." I set my grandmother's serving tray, the same one still unreturned all these months, that I'd brought that first day I heard her on the phone, down on the table between us, hard enough that the water glasses jumped. Then I reached over, picked up the folded copy of the fraudulent filing I'd brought in my clutch, and tore it once cleanly down the middle. "I don't need this anymore," I said. "The original's already with the district attorney's financial crimes unit, and with Meridian Trust's fraud department, since they didn't know the collateral had a forged signature on it either." 2 men who had been quietly seated at the bar the entire dinner stood up. One of them was a fraud investigator from the DA's office. The other, an off-duty detective Priya had arranged as a courtesy escort for exactly this scenario. They didn't cuff anyone at the table, that came later quieter at Curtis's office the next morning, but they did ask both my mother and Curtis to step outside to answer some questions, and the sound of my mother's chair scraping back across the hotel floor was, I have to admit, one of the most satisfying sounds I have ever heard. Curtis Vance was indicted 6 weeks later on charges of financial fraud and forgery, facing up to 14 years. His firm, which turned out to be an unlicensed advisory operation running 3 similar schemes against elderly and recently married clients, was shut down by state regulators within the month. 2 other victims came forward within days of the news breaking. My mother was charged with fraud, forgery, and identity theft related to the loan. She avoided prison through a plea deal, 18 months of probation, full restitution of the $180,000, and a permanent flag on her credit and legal record. But the plea required her to admit on the court record in her own words exactly what she'd done and why. Meridian Trust Lending voided the loan entirely and released the lien on my company within a week of receiving the fraud report, refunding the $1,400 in fees my company had been incorrectly charged in the interim. My grandmother's extended family, aunts, cousins, people who'd sided with my mother at the wedding because a slap is a very convincing piece of theater, began quietly reaching out to apologize. I didn't need the apologies, but I accepted them because most of them had simply believed what they were shown the same way I almost did. The one act of grace I insisted on, 3 of my employees had, without my knowledge, been contacted by Curtis's associates during the fraud investigation and pressured to confirm false invoices that would have implicated them if they'd cooperated. I paid for independent legal counsel for all 3 out of pocket, so none of them would carry legal exposure for something they'd been dragged into by my mother's scheme. Not one of them lost a paycheck over this. That mattered to me more than the restitution did. It was raining the night my mother showed up at our door, for months after the plea deal. No umbrella. Her coat, the good wool one she'd always been particular about, soaked through at the shoulders. She looked smaller than I remembered her being at any point in my whole life. "I don't have anywhere else," she said. "Please, Marin. I'm your mother." I stood in the doorway, the warm light of our house behind me, and I felt the old muscle memory pull toward guilt, and then I felt it settle quietly into something calmer instead. You are my mother, I said. That's true regardless of what happens next. But you forged my name, mortgaged my life's work, and slapped me in front of 200 people to make sure no one would believe me when I found out. I'm not going to let you back into a life you tried to burn down for $180,000. I didn't slam the door. I closed it gently the way you close a door on something that's already over. Inside, Theo was waiting at the kitchen table with 2 mugs of tea. He didn't ask what happened. He just slid one across to me and said, "You okay?" "I'm okay," I said, and meant it, maybe for the first time since the wedding. I think I finally am. Here's what I learned. The people who need you to doubt yourself are usually the ones with the most to hide. A raised hand in public is rarely about what it claims to be about. It's a distraction timed to land right before the truth does. Stay calm. Get the paperwork. Let them think they've won. Has anyone in your family ever tried to discredit you right before you found out the truth? Tell me about it in the comments. I read every one. And if this story hit home, hit like, subscribe for more. And I'll see you in the next one.